Okay, this is a Tuesday, May 14th, 2024 council meeting. This is going to be our budget workshop, which we're going to have today from 1:30 to 3:30. We're going to end promptly at 3:30. We have closed session, 3:30 to 5, and we'll be back for open session at 5 o'clock. So I'll ask first Anne Marie for the roll call, please.
Councilmember Orgill.
Here.
Councilmember Weiss.
Here.
Councilmember Whalen.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Renagi.
Here.
Mayor Kemp.
Here. Okay, at this time, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance led by Mayor Pro Tem Renagi.
Everyone, please join me for your right hand over.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to start tonight with our agenda bill, which is the budget workshop, and we'll turn this over to Gavin.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. Gavin Curran, Assistant City Manager, CFO. And to my right here, I have Tom Perez, our Assistant Director of Public Works. We'll be going through a brief presentation. I'll be walking through the operating budget. Tom will be walking through the capital improvement program. And then, of course, as we always do, we open it up for City Council questions and comments, and then to public comment as well. So the proposed budget for 24-25, it's a balanced budget. We worked very hard to make sure it aligned with the City Council's goals and priorities for the year. It really shows about improving upon existing services, not really adding new services, but more improving on our existing ones, from South Laguna Beaches to programming at our Laguna Beach Community and Recreation Center, and of course, our successful ambulance program. And of course, it does preserve our 20% general fund reserve. That remains intact. It also looks to continue investment in our core services. There's funding for continuing our workforce initiatives. We have funding for technology projects, more funding for those cybersecurity projects, and even funding for our computer-aided dispatch center for our safety departments. Enhancements to infrastructure, and of course, Tom will be talking about that a little bit more. And then this year, we did add to the budget, and you'll see that in front of every department section. We tried to add department performance measures. It's kind of the first step toward developing these, but it's kind of our first attempt to try to add these to the budget. So in front of every department section, you'll see those performance measures, and we'll measure those again as a comparisons when we do the 25-26 budget. Okay, there we go. So this next slide was taken right out of the transmittal letter, and it really shows, it tries to show revenues by the major funds. And so those will be your general fund, your Measure L, capital improvement, parking, gas tax, street light, utility, and transit. And if you kind of read the graph or chart really from the left to the right, you have your actuals we had in 22-23. It then shows the adopted budget for 23-24, and then our year-end estimate we put together for 23-24, and then the proposed budget for 24-25, and then it shows the dollars and the percentage changes really from the estimate itself to what for 23-24 to what we're proposing for next year. I think for the general fund, we're looking at a 3% increase, kind of a 4% overall. And then if you really look closely at the other funds, you can kind of see, and also as you see in the general fund, but also in those other funds, you can see that change from the adopted. You can show it's actually anywhere from 0 to 1% to 2%. And what that is telling us, and what I kind of talked about also with the strategic planning session, is we did see a big bump after the pandemic in revenues. We kind of maybe overshot the revenue estimates in 23-24. We're kind of right sizing those a little bit for 24-25. So you'll see more, it seems flat, but it really is. If you look at that column where that's a change over the estimate, you're seeing the growth over what we expect to receive this year. But I think the story in that last column kind of tells it, where we were seeing that very fast growth in revenues post-pandemic. It's kind of right sizing for Laguna, and I'll kind of talk about revenues a little bit more in our major revenues in the next couple of slides, but it kind of tells that story a little bit where we are. This next slide is the expenditures by major fund. And again, if you just go from the left to the right, you've got the actuals for 2 years ago, the adopted for 23-24, what we're proposing for 24-25, and then the dollar change and percentage change. And you can see for the general fund, it's about a 4% increase in expenditures, and I'll get a little more detail on that in the future slides. The Measure LL fund, it's a 25% increase, and really that's reflective of the set aside of about $500,000 for the standards of cover, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And the other funds, the capital improvement, parking, gas tax, street lighting, it's really the swings are more related to capital improvements. And Todd will be going through those projects here in the next phase of the presentation. But that kind of is what's changing those percentages there. But and then transit, it's a 19% increase. I should mention this. So that's really related to some contractual services changes, but a lot of that's funded through programs through OCTA and LTF funds. So this next slide I mentioned, just our reserves. We have a 20% general fund reserve, 17.1 million. And it's really to maintain our services, for impacts for significant events. And then we also have our disaster contingency. It's at $7 million now. It's about 8% of the general fund. That is really set aside to repair public facilities, emergency protection of lives and private property during a disaster. So it kind of addresses disaster contingencies. It's equal to about 8%. The goal is to try to get it to 10%, but right now it's sitting about 8%. So down the next future budgets, we'll have to consider contributing more to that either at mid-year or at additional time. But right now it's about 8%. It's $7 million. This next slide takes the general fund really by the major revenue categories. So obviously your top 3 revenue categories are property tax, sales tax, and transient occupancy tax. It also shows you community development fees, Laguna Beach marketing and tourism, and then other general fund revenues. That kind of brings the total to where we are for the general fund. And again, left to right, you've got your actuals for 22-23 adopted last year, what our estimate is for 23-24, and then we're proposing for this year, and then the change in dollars for those major categories. So for property tax, it's about a 4.8, kind of round it a little bit here for this chart, it shows 5%, but it's 4.8 overall, 4.5 per secured, and I'll talk about that the next slide. Sales tax, we're projecting 2% increase for next year, and transient occupancy tax 5%. And again, this is that growth over what we're expecting to get that estimate for this year. Community development fees, about 9%, kind of what we're seeing current trends of those revenue sources. And then the Laguna Beach marketing and tourism, it's at 13%. It's a little higher than what you would see, say, for TOT. And the reason is, if the council recalls, I want to say almost a year and a half ago, the council set aside about 1.5 million to help offset what we were expecting to see in hotel closures for refurbishments and things. And so that money was able to be used for the general fund, but for the marketing and tourism, it wasn't applied to that. And so that's why you're seeing kind of a bigger percentage increase than you would see for TOT. And then other general fund revenue, it's down about 11%. And that's really, we're taking out the solid waste fees out of the budget. That's because those are going to be billed directly to residents instead of going through the property tax. And so that's why that number is coming out. And that also is a pull. We're taking out the expenditures related to that program as well. So these next few slides just kind of summarize our major taxes and just show some historical information. So if you look at the table on the left, it really shows the property tax growth change in that secured property tax or assessed valuation over the last, say, 8 years. And you can see the highest year was last year at 8.3%. And so next year, we're proposing 4.5%. And in total, the secured is about 52, or total property tax, I should say, is a total about 52.7 million in the general fund. And then if you look at the table on the right, or the graph on the right, it kind of just shows you more graphically how those things have changed. This next table is TOT sales tax, fee development fees. And again, it just kind of graphically shows kind of what's been happening from 21-22 to 22-23, we're estimating and what we're proposing. And then I always point this out that 1% TOT is about 107,000, 1% in sales tax is 76,000. And again, for sales tax, we're estimating about a 2% increase for that and about a 5% increase in TOT. In total, if you added up the TOT sales tax, community development fee revenues in the general fund, it's about 24.3%. So fund balance or general fund changes that for next year, some of the major kind of changes or impacts of the general fund. So in the general fund for next year incorporates all the funding for labor agreements and negotiated salary and benefits increases, as well as increasing in our CalPERS pension, which is about $500,000. The overall, and I mentioned this, as I mentioned in the budget, the overall unfunded liability for the city is around $91 million as of June 30th of 2022. And the budget also includes, as I mentioned earlier, information technology upgrades. It's in your cybersecurity, additional firewalls, additional improvements to the Laguna Beach Community Recreation Center, and then funding for the new computer-aided dispatch system. If the council recalls, they approved the records management system this last year. So the next phase of that upgrade is the CAD system itself. Funding for herbicide-free fuel modification program in the budget, we set aside $770,000 for that program. We also had $600,000 already set aside in this fiscal year that we carried over to next year. Kind of brings the total up to almost about $1.4 million for that program. Additional funding for city attorney services at about $1.5 million. And again, we're continuing to program more into the recreation services at community and recreation centers. So adding additional revenue and appropriations for those programs. So now I'm going to walk through some of the other funds. The transit fund, we'll begin with that. So the transit fund, we still include services for Canyon Trolley Route, the Coastal Trolley Route, expanded Summer Breeze Trolley Route. And of course, this one's based on that grant program from OCTA, that grant we expect to receive. So if you don't receive the grant, that would probably be removed from the adopted budget. Continuing the neighborhood on-demand service, and of course, continued trolley service during our holiday weekends. These are the weekends outside of the summer. So they were those holiday weekends. Overall, the operating budget for the transit fund is about $6.7 million. State grants and OCTA assistance cover almost half of that, and the parking fund covers the rest. So typically, any changes to the transit fund at this point are then funded through the parking fund allocation. So the parking fund, again, the budget includes the rate increase of 10% during the summer months. I think this is the last of two rate increases, one for 24 and one for 25. The available fund balance in the parking funds, $4.5 million, and that's at the end of 24-25. And the programs funded out of the parking fund, $6.6 million for your parking enforcement, your maintenance, operations and maintenance of the parking fund, $2.4 million of capital improvements, and that's something Tom will talk about during his presentation, and then $4.2 million in transfers. So $3.4 million in transit, and that's the kind of transfer I talked about earlier for funding the transit fund. We set aside $300,000 each year to the vehicle replacement fund to replace trolleys, and you'll see that has actually, we've started that, I can't remember, several years ago. But you can see now there's enough funding. If you see there's about $1.8 million to replace 4 trolleys for electric trolleys. And that transfer is actually funding those replacements. We accumulate the money over time. And then $525,000 every year to the general fund. For the street lighting, and utility and wastewater fund. So we're setting aside, each year we set aside $1.1 million in the street lighting and utility fund. It goes for maintenance of the street lighting system. And then every year we transfer $1 million into the Wildfire Mitigation and Fire Safety Fund. In the wastewater fund, 6% rate increase next year, and I think this is the second to the last rate increase of 6%. And there's $6 billion in capital improvement projects in 24-25, but over the next 2 years, so 24-25 and next year 25-26, the following year, there'll be about 17 million in improvements in the wastewater system. And of course, Tom will talk about that as well. And then most of those, when we talk about capital improvements, these are large capital projects. The intent was, and it still is, to continue to use IBEC low interest loans to fund those capital improvements as well. So the gas tax, Measure LL, wildfire mitigation and fire safety. And so in the LL, 3.7 million in revenue, 3.5 million for public safety, and 500,000 has been set aside for the fire department standards of cover, which will be presented to the council at a future council meeting, but that money's been earmarked in the LL fund to help fund recommendations from that report. South Laguna, 1.4 million in revenue, and it's about 700,000 in parking revenue, about 700,000 in interest revenue we're still earning from the contribution received from the county. So that's helping with that revenue source. 2.8 million of that goes to marine safety services. 944,000 goes for public works, and then 550 for equipment. And then a large chunk of that equipment purchase this year is the 375,000 for a beach front loader or a piece of beach front loader equipment in that area. And then I just note that at this pace, of course, things can change, but the county contributed about 22 million towards South Laguna when we actually did the transfer. That funding will likely be exhausted anywhere from between 8 to 10 years. So we'll have to do some planning to account for that, to fully incorporate that budget down the road. The gas tax fund, about 2.5 million for slurry seal street improvements. Wildfire mitigation is 1.1 million for programs approved under the Wild Safety and Fire Report. And then it's always mentioned we do fund a fire inspector position from the Wildfire Mitigation and Fire Safety Fund. And with that, I'm turning it over to Tom.
Thank you, Gavin.
I have
So,
a question, Gavin. You haven't handed out, normally you hand out the slides to us. How come you haven't done that? It's a lot easier to take notes for us and for.
Oh, I apologize, Councilman Weiss. The slideshow was included with the report, the agenda report, so it should be attached. But if not, I'll
Okay,
give you my copy, actually, because I have a spare.
thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Okay, I didn't look in there. Okay, I looked at everything else. That one. Okay, thank you. You don't need to give me yours.
Thank you. Okay, so to briefly walk through the 10-year CIP, just first like to walk through how the CIP is developed. So initially, the Public Works Department will work closely with finance to determine what our projected revenues are, and then we'll make determinations whether we are able to increase or need to decrease the project list for the year. Then we'll take a look at CIP projects that were funded the previous year, identify any needs that need to be moved forward. We'll look at previous council actions, see if there are any new priorities that have come up throughout the year, and we'll move those projects forward. And then as part of that effort, just shuffling and reprioritizing. Sometimes project needs are advanced at a further rate, so they'll move up in years. And then the coordination happens between the public works maintenance function and all the other departments throughout the city to identify the various needs throughout the city, and then put that into the 10-year planning document. So Gavin spent some time walking through the various funds that we have here in the city. The funding for the capital improvement program consists of funding from the Capital Improvement Fund. the parking fund, the gas tax fund, and the wastewater fund. So since Gavin has walked through a few of these, I just wanted to briefly walk through the revenues available in the capital improvement funds. So we had a starting balance of $564,000, and then added on just 7.3 million from the transient tax, brought in another 895,000 from parking and vehicle code fines, additional 650,000 from real property tax, and 100,000 from the building construction tax, giving us a funding revenue source of roughly $9.5 million this year. So with the prioritization of the projects, we first take a look at projects that were prior city council actions. So this year, those projects include the Fire Station number 4 replacement project, and then also the enclosed lifeguard tower installation, which is going to take a look at installing enclosed towers at all beaches throughout the city that are currently do not have the enclosed tower. We also look at supplemental funding needed for current projects. This year, for instance, the Sleepy Hollow Beach access is being funded for construction where it was previously identified for design funding. The storm preparation and drainage improvements are a critical part of the capital improvement program. One of the main projects this year is our storm drain master plan, which is an update to a previous document that's going to be looking to identify where we've made improvements, where additional improvements are needed, and help us to prioritize in our upcoming 10-year capital improvement programs. And then finally, we have the maintenance of existing facilities, and an example of that this year would be the Fire Station 2 generator replacement project. And then new projects this year include the CRC transfer switch project and then the PD cabling. And these are projects that come about through the year and are identified and brought into the capital improvement program. So with that, I'd like to highlight some of the key projects that were completed this fiscal year. First, we have the Moss Street Beach access, which is actually going to be completed Thursday, and just in time for our ribbon cutting event on Friday. So that's a very critical project, maintaining the access to the beach. We try to program one beach access project a year, whether design, construction, and keep that moving forward. Another great project that was completed is the Diamond Street Assessment District, an ongoing attempt to continue putting the utility lines underground. Another major water quality improvement is the Bluebird Canyon outfall and diversion structure replacement. That was at the Bluebird Canyon outfall. That project is wrapping up next week. We also completed the Molten Meadows dog play area, which received grant funding, and so we were pleased to bring that forward. And that's just an example of several of the projects. And then one of the other major projects being the Park Avenue Utility Underground project, which is between St. Anne's and Went Terrace. That's approximately 80% complete. So we're excited to keep that project moving forward towards completion. So some key projects that we're looking to begin construction on in this upcoming fiscal year include the Cleo Street Beach access. We're right now working to bring that to the Planning Commission for design review, move that into construction next fiscal year. The Glen Eyrie parking structure rehab is actually, bids are opening this afternoon. So we're looking to receive bids and bring that project forward for construction. The Woods Cove Assessment District that was approved in December is slated to begin construction in July. So we're working to get that project under construction. The Bluebird Canyon Rule 20A project, which is led by Southern California Edison, is also scheduled to begin in July. So some great projects moving towards our wildfire safety. So those are some major improvements for the city. In addition, we're looking to move forward the Main Beach Park renovation that will be coming back to the Planning Commission in June. And then the police department cabling improvements will be making an overhaul to the IT and cable within the police department. And then the Fire Station 4 replacement is to put the new fire station in South Laguna. Some of the key projects where we'll start design next fiscal year include the storm drain master plan update, which I mentioned. And similarly, we're looking to begin design on a wastewater system analysis and master plan update to really take an inventory of what the city's system includes, identify key needs, and then lay out what our capital program and costs will be for the next 10 to 20 years for our wastewater system. So that's an exciting project we have beginning this year. In addition, as I mentioned, the enclosed lifeguard tower, that's an initiative to improve safety for our marine safety personnel. So that'll be looking at studying the environmental impacts of installing those lifeguard towers on the beaches. So to provide a brief overview by funding type, you see the beach access improvements. We have 1.2 million. That's the construction estimate. Drainage improvements, just under $1 million. Looking at the facilities rehab and renovation, that'll include projects on city facilities, really just to maintain our systems and make key improvements. The parking facilities, that's in large part the funding for new parking meters and the improvements that we're going to be making to the Glen Eyrie parking structure. The playgrounds and parks, that's a standard allocation we've been doing every year. We'll fund $400,000 to go towards parks throughout the city. Some of those are improvements that are coming up on an as-needed basis, and we'll be coordinating that with the playground master plan that's in progress. The slope stabilization, those projects, they come about as needed. We also have, for instance, this year at the dog park, there's been some slope stability issues that we've identified and we'll be addressing this year. And then also in South Laguna on Sunset, we have some emergency repair that will be underway. As I mentioned, the Fire Station 4, this is an additional allocation to cover the construction of that facility. And then the street improvements and rehab include our slurry seal program, our grind and overlay. And then the wastewater is, again, maintaining our wastewater system. And that could include some of the projects to replace our existing lift stations and harden those facilities. So this last slide is a snapshot of the 10-year plan by project. I think most notable here is the $80 million for the wastewater improvements. So it's a very large sum, a big piece of that being work that's been identified for the NCI. We have a project that's currently in design to replace Reach 5, which is the portion that extends from Coast Highway through Aliso Canyon over to the wastewater treatment plant. So that's one of the major initiatives, is making the improvements to our wastewater infrastructure. And beyond that, we have a pretty even distribution amongst these types. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn back over to Gavin.
Thanks, Tom. So just the next couple of slides. So there were a couple of requests that were not accommodated in the budget that I just wanted to highlight. One, or at least items 1 and 2 were position requests. And the first one is a position for a records position. And this would really be to help with not just help dealing with the city's document management system but also with public records request as well. Item number 2 is a cybersecurity IT position. I think I've probably come before the council a number of times, asked for money for more cybersecurity, but this is one where we don't have a formal cybersecurity kind of position in the city, and the technical skills really for IT and especially cybersecurity are becoming more and more, just because of the threats that are out there becoming more and more sophisticated. So that's why you're seeing that request here, just to have that position in the city. And then the third request is $500,000. This is a one-time cost for microgrid resiliency. And I want to mention that this was something that was brought up during the annual planning workshop earlier this year. And the council identified kind of installing solar panels at the city facilities as one of its top priorities. So at March 26th, staff presented some concepts at the council meeting, received direction to solicit proposals for various city facilities. And we're coming back to present that. Jeremy's coming back to present that in summer of 2024. So this is really funding set aside for that program. And then the last was just to mention there was a reclassification of a maintenance worker to maintenance supervisor. It wasn't in the budget itself. It's really a no-cost item to do this. And so it's just, I wanted to make sure we present it here to the council. So it'll be part of the adopted budget if approved by the council, but it's really a reclassification with no net impact to the council, to the budget itself. And as we do every year, we always show the one-time costs and the ongoing costs, just so the council is aware of the differences of the requests and what we're asking for. And so this concludes the presentation, and really what we're looking for is feedback from the council and questions and responses on the proposed budget. And just to look ahead to the June 25th, 24, when we come back to actually adopt the budget that night, we'll be approving the budget with any changes from the council, the direction from the council. We typically do approve the GAN limit for next year. We reaffirm those the funding resolution. So the council recalls there was a number of funding direction with regards to, for example, disaster contingency, funding for the housing, funding for open space. That funding resolution will come back to have the council reaffirm that direction that evening. And then we will present with the agenda a master fee schedule, which really brings together all the fees that the city does charge, so we can have at least a look for the public to see everything that's being assessed and what those fees are, and they can go to one schedule to see all of those. And of course, as we do set the salary and exceptional performance pay for the city clerk and the city treasurer that evening as well. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and myself, Tom, and all the city staff here, department heads, are happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Okay, thank you, Gavin, and thank you, Tom. That was a lot, that represents a lot of work. I don't know if people are aware how much work you put into that, but it's a lot of work.
Mayor,
Go ahead, yeah.
first, Tom, I feel like you're involved in every project in the city, so I appreciate all that you do. I don't know how if you have enough time to sleep, but I appreciate it. Question for the city manager. So we talked about this today, but going forward, can we include IT as part of the capital improvement program?
I think that's something I'd like to look at. I need to talk with Gavin about that some more, but I think that's an important thing to approach it that way. Like it's an investment
Yeah,
in
that's
infrastructure.
great. And then,
if
go
if I
ahead.
could, there are projects in the CIP for our IT program. So
Well, like the cabling and things like
Right.
that, but I guess I'm referring to software implementation
Gotcha.
and like the and so, and then question for Tom about the so it was in 2008 we passed, or the council adopted, I wasn't here, a storm drain master plan, and we've been implementing that since then.
yes,
And so can you better help me understand what is the so we would be bringing in a consultant to update that plan
Yes, so we would take a look at that plan, identify projects that are listed in that plan that have been completed, review then any changes resulting from the implementation, and then also just identify any new areas that have risen as problematic. So it would be an update and revisiting where we stand today.
And are we seeing, because we always should be looking at our storm drains, but we also have to be prioritizing things because we only have a finite amount of funds. So I think, to me, the wastewater master plan is because I mean, I think it's crazy that we've never done a wastewater master plan in this city. It's I don't understand that, but it's great that we're moving forward with that. So obviously you have only a certain amount of resources. So does the storm drain master plan update, does that gonna get in the way of doing the wastewater master plan?
No, they should
Okay.
run concurrent.
And then would it be possible before this storm drain master plan update gets going that there could be an agenda item to the council that goes over what was the 2008 master plan, which projects have been implemented? Because I think that would be really good for us to see before we move forward with this. Is that, and I'm open to staff's feedback on that because I know you don't have an answer now, but the other question I had was about there's a proposal for a fire station 2 emergency generator replacement, and we need to have resilient fire stations. But if we were to do a microgrid with solar, do we know if that could achieve the same goal that this generator would achieve?
Yes, I'm going to actually turn over to Jeremy
Okay.
to address that.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Mayor, City Council. As of last week, we completed some modeling as part of the RFP process that suggests we could achieve the same results with a microgrid system as a generator. That's where we are today. We would bring the results of that back in July or August, your meeting, but between now and then, I'd certainly want to meet with the fire department and just logistically look at
Yeah.
if it's feasible from an operational,
Absolutely.
but kilowatt per kilowatt, yes.
Because
Right now, it suggests so based on our modeling.
And financially, how does it differ?
I would say it's within the same ballpark of what's proposed, the 300,000.
so
And any other benefit for generating electricity for the station and adjacent sites?
I'm not sure about adjacent sites. The benefit
Okay.
is just, as with any microgrid system, less of a reliance on the energy grid itself.
Yeah.
Cost mechanisms or cost benefits, we'd have to bring that back as part of the RFP to see what we receive.
Well, I think it's great because we just found $300,000 for microgrids, if that's true. So thank you for your work on that. On the enclosed lifeguard installations, I think, to me, this is a priority because we don't want we really don't want our lifeguards to be sitting in the sun. 2029 is in a long time. That it looks like that's when we'd be able to finish having enclosed lifeguard towers. So is there a reason why because I didn't think that's on our agenda later today. We have a design for a lifeguard tower. Is that right? An enclosed lifeguard tower?
Yes.
So I guess I'd be interested in looking at, maybe not for this fiscal year, but for going forward, if there's a way to reallocate it so that we can get an earlier timeline for having enclosed lifeguard towers. But open to hearing feedback from the Marine Safety Department. The other question is for I guess it could be for Michael Litchi, but first of all, I really like our parking meters look horrible, and so I love on page 265 the plan to add the parking pay stations, and I think they're also easier for people to use. Is this something, as contemplated in this CIP, by the end of 2026, we're essentially not going to have parking meters in town? Am I reading that right?
So,
Good afternoon, Councilmember Inagi, Michael Litchi, Director of Transit Community Services. So Councilmember Inagi, the plan is to gradually increase the number of pay stations we have, replacing the parking meters. However, we don't expect to get to a point where we have 0 parking meters because of the
Sure.
location of some of the parking meters
Got it.
in an area that doesn't have a sidewalk or doesn't allow a pay station to be implemented. So where we're looking to put the pay stations is in areas where we have a high concentration of parking meters, like Heisler Park, some areas in the downtown. There are other areas along Coast Highway, for example, that have a lot of driveways and alleyways. So we don't want to force people to walk across multiple streets to pay. So we'll, at the end of the program, still have a hybrid system, but we'll have a much larger concentration of the pay stations, similar to what we did near the Sawdust Festival this past summer, and replaced all of those meters on Laguna Canyon Road and Frontage Road with the multi-space pay stations. And then the other piece of that puzzle is that because the pay stations are license plate based, you don't need to put a receipt on your vehicle, but you do need to enter your license plate when you make payment. So the enforcement side of that is the other piece that we're working with PD on right now to get license plate enforcement cameras on the parking enforcement vehicles so that they can enforce
Great.
based on the plates.
So it would make it easier for the city to enforce parking violations once we fully implement to the extent we can, because I get what you're saying, that in certain areas you're not going to be able to do stations.
Correct. So the ultimate goal is that it would be much more efficient to enforce with the park enforcement officer driving the vehicle with the camera pinging on any plate that doesn't show a payment or a parking permit, rather than walking around individually and looking at each vehicle one by one.
Correct. And then, go ahead.
Do you mind if I ask a
Yeah.
follow-on question while Michael's up here? Michael, what about the opportunity to get paid parking on some of the areas where we're putting in the sidewalks? Where we haven't had it before?
Yeah, so Mayor Kempf, I don't know that that's not a conversation I've been involved in. I think that would be something we could look into and would likely require Coastal Commission approval. So perhaps that's something when we go back, we're in year 4, as Gavin mentioned, of the 5-year CDP for parking rates. So that could be an element of that renewed CDP when we go back looking at expanding the areas where we have paid parking. And you're referring mostly in South Laguna area, or?
Well, like, along Aliso where they're putting in the wall and all that, where there's a sidewalk.
Yeah, so we could look at that as part of the CDP when we take it back.
I think it should be looked at to go beyond Aliso and up the hill. And I think that there are other parts in town that could be looked at as well. And I believe there's legislation that is now requiring us to pull back parking 25 feet from the sidewalk. Is that correct?
Public Works may be more familiar with that. I do remember reading something similar to that there's some new regulations regarding where parking spaces can be located. And you can't have parking spaces right up to the end of the corner. Is that what you're referring to?
Correct.
Yeah, I have read about that. I don't know that we've taken a detailed look at how many spaces that would impact in town, but that'll be something that we can look at.
All right. Well, that's a conversation for another time. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the move to these kiosks because I think that helps everybody. Sometimes those meters are not readable in the sun and difficult and you also have to process coins, and we want to get away from that, right? Is it much more efficiency? I mean, you're improving the efficiency of the system here and probably saving some money. Can you address that at all?
Yeah, so Councilmember Weiss, there is an efficiency because rather than having our staff have to go and collect individual meters and dump the coins out of each, we have, one pay station can serve anywhere between 10 and 15 parking spaces. So you have an efficiency there. You also have an efficiency in that we're not having to pay to maintain as many pieces of equipment because you're replacing, again, 10 to 15 parking meters with a single pay station. And then we've also introduced mobile parking options. So people are paying through their phone, which eliminates having to use, any on-street hardware. But yeah, ultimately that will get us to a more efficient system. And now the majority of our payments anyway, with our existing system are credit card based. It's close to 90% of the payments are credit card versus coin or cash.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Michael, can we do all our Michael
Yeah.
questions? Since
Go
he's
ahead.
here?
Yeah.
I should have sat down.
Yeah, you should sit down. These are easy. So you get grant funding in for OCTA. I know you're so I think for expansion of Summer Breeze and also for some additional out to El Toro for our local, Laguna local.
Correct.
Update on timing for, you heard anything?
So the last we've heard from OCTA, they're still reviewing applications. We've also checked with some other cities. We submitted these grant applications to OCTA in January. They were originally supposed to get back with recommended awards in April. obviously we're past April now, and we have not yet gotten questions back from OCT on the application. So they seem to be behind a bit. But we did request funding for some expanded trolley service on the weekends on the coastal route on Coast Highway, as well as expanded summer breeze service. And then as you mentioned, about a little over $500,000 a year for expanded Laguna local service out to the neighborhoods off of Laguna Canyon Road in El Toro. So we're hopeful that those projects will be funded, and we would come back to council at that point with budget requests for the additional funding necessary for the local match if we receive those grants.
Okay, and then, thank you. And then my second question was, budget says we're replacing 4 trolleys. I don't know if this is you, or I think this would probably be your bailiwick, right? Are we leasing those, buying those? I mean, and the ultimate thrust of the question is, we have an electrification plan now, and we're trying to convert by 2030, I think. So if we're buying 4 in 24, I don't know what the useful life of those is. And can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, Councilmember Whalen. So we have 4 trolleys that are past their useful life. Our oldest, we call them Molly trolleys. That's the brand of them. So the funding included in the budget anticipates replacing those 4 with EV trolleys. The timing of that purchase is really going to be dependent on the infrastructure. Public Works is working on a plan for installing EV chargers. So we don't want to purchase the EV trolleys and then not have a way to charge them. If we don't have the permanent infrastructure in place, there are some temporary solutions we can look at to bridge the gap to be able to use them. But at this point, the anticipation would be purchasing EV trolleys, 4 EV trolleys to replace the oldest existing propane trolleys we have.
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Following up on that, what do the cities that, like Dana Point and all the cities who copied us with the trolley, do they lease the trolley, or do they all follow the same model that we do where they own their trolleys?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Renagi, it's a little bit all over the map.
Okay.
Some cities lease them through the contract operator, Laz Parking.
Okay.
Some own the trolleys. So there's not kind of a one size fits all approach.
So have we looked into the opportunity of potentially purchasing or leasing electric trolleys from Laz? Is that something that we've looked at in the past?
We haven't looked at that previously because we do currently own and maintain all of our trolleys. So if we had a contract operator, we would either have to have them have a maintenance facility for those trolleys, which likely would be outside of the city just based on space constraints, or have an agreement where we maintain a vehicle that they own. It is something we can look at in terms of the cost efficiency of it, but
Yeah.
I think when it had been explored in the past, it was more efficient for the city to own and maintain the trolleys.
Okay. Yeah, definitely something to look into, because especially with all the complications for converting to electric vehicle. I don't know if Laz is doing that in other areas, but that might just be a way to kind of from a cash flow perspective, would be good for the city, but also that way when you lease, you can just keep getting the better version. And then that's my final question for Michael, but I have one more question for Gavin. So we had a very exciting SACWA tentative deal that would involve Moulton Niguel giving us, $8.5 million, or giving us, Emerald Bay and South Coast Water District 8.5.
I think 13.5 for the coastal treatment and 6.5 for regional.
Yeah, 13. Yeah, so 13. So I guess we could spend the next 2 hours talking about the details of that deal, but does in the CIP it contemplates, I think over the next, it contemplates $11.5 million from the city's side. Does this SACWA, this deal that is going to come back to the council, and we'll have to go to all the other agencies, but let's assume for the sake of discussion that were to move forward, would that reduce the amount of general fund or CIP dollars that we would have to put into the coastal treatment plant?
I think I'm going to answer an engineering question without being an engineer. I would think so. So those, and just for the council's benefit, there were agreements to be released from Moulton Niguel on Friday last week, and I haven't seen them yet. And we're coming back to the council, second meeting in May to review those proposals. And as Councilmember Whalen said, 13.5 million would go to the coastal treatment plan. So assuming all that plays out as we had at the meeting, I'm sure we'd reevaluate the CIP over the next 10 to 15 years, the coastal, absolutely, because it's money coming in and prioritizing projects. And as I say, re-envisioning what the coastal treatment plan may look like, but a lot of work has to happen along the way. Yes.
Absolutely.
But no, once those agreements are here and the council evaluates them and gives better direction or gives direction on what to do, then we'll obviously go and reevaluate the capital approval program for sure.
That's exciting.
Yes,
Thank
it's
you.
very exciting.
Any more questions for
Yeah,
Cal?
I do. I appreciate the updates on all the infrastructure projects. Great job on the budget, but there wasn't an update on the IT side of this in terms of we've implemented a number of software programs to automate things and to make things more efficient. And now we're going to measure departmental efficiency. So could you provide a brief update of that? I mean, we haven't had that for quite some time. I know we had implemented Bluebeam. We're implementing a CAD system. We're implementing, I think, a database system from Oracle. That's what I understood. I'm not sure. Are we financial program?
So, Councilmember Weiss, and if it's the council's desire, I can probably come back and give a more
Okay.
robust
All right. Okay.
update. I can give kind
Yeah.
of a very
Yeah, I understand.
high-level update. I can tell you that the funding you've set aside for the finance HR system, that the finance component of it, which is your accounts payable, your general ledger, your accounts receivable, is expected to go live by the end of June, so starting July 1st. The payroll itself takes a little bit longer, so they're trying to target January 1st of 2025. As anybody knows, it's probably best to kick off payroll the first part of the year.
Yeah.
Your records management system for your safety departments is well underway, and we're currently working on the RFP or the process to implement the CAD system. So that'll come in 2025. And so that's funding set aside in the budget to do that. Other IT improvements the council has approved over the last year or two really been more back-end cybersecurity improvements to firewalls, which as Councilman Renagi mentioned, that these maybe capital improvements make more sense because these purchases are becoming quite expensive, which some things cost us 20,000, say 10 years ago, they're now costing you 100 to 120,000 to replace. But those were the improvements that needed to be made, and your back end, it's not as say glamorous because the public doesn't get to see it, but the back end cybersecurity where you're replacing some significant hardware with much improved hardware is really paying benefits, and you'll see that in in password protections, and even more recently the rollout of multi-factor, and I think the council is aware that we've implemented that as well. So that's the high level, but I'm happy to return with kind of a more detailed on where things are and give
Well, I
you.
think the city manager has indicated an interest in perhaps developing a master technology plan, and I think that would be, the update would be part of that. Because I do think we're behind in, for a city of our size and sophistication and automated tools, both for residents and for the staff. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'll save most of my comments till after public comments, with the exception of one. For the Plenary Street renovation, does that include adding additional spaces on that? I can't remember if that was part of the plan.
No, so this project is to address some structural issue at the stairs, recode and address spalling, things of that nature. But separate from that, there is the project to look at adding a potential third floor to increase the parking. So I've been
Partial third floor.
partial third floor, yes. So I've been working together with the engineer who put together the plans for this effort, and then the engineer who's looking at that to ensure that nothing will conflict or prevent that from moving forward. So that process is moving separate from this.
Great. Well, you answered my question. Thank you.
Tom, you had 13.3 million over the course of 10 years for pedestrian. Is that sidewalks essentially?
Yes, so it includes closing some gaps in various areas, but for the most part, that's including
Both
sidewalks. and
replacement of
crosswalks.
sidewalks and some new sidewalks.
Yes.
Both of those. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we need to get to the public hearing. How many people here want to speak on the budget? Okay, we'll have public comment until 5 till 3, and then we need to get, we have a hard stop at 3:30, so we're gonna get back to the council by 5 till 3. Okay, come on up.
Hi, Judy Mancuso. I want to first read some comments from one of the members of the ESC that couldn't be here. He says a few observations. There is zero relationship between budget allocation and performance outcomes. See Irvine budget as an example, city that does this well. It's common best practice. A lot of spending on gas trucks and SUVs, 3.8 million. Major money for cars and parking, 12 million, but nothing allocated for complete streets or other alternative transportation. And then this is a question, will the cap require capital investment? So that's his list. And then my list, when I watched the strategic planning session, Sean at the time talked about that we did not have a procurement officer and that we needed a procurement officer, obviously. And I didn't see it on the list of resources that Gavin has listed. So I was wondering, is that a part of current staff so that you don't have to have it? Or did we not include it, and should it be included? I mean, it should be included, but is it captured somewhere else? And then the trolleys, I'm not sure how they're all getting paid, but I'd like to see them paid from the TOT or whatever comes from the tourist as well. And then this is a question. The 80 million, is that tied? And I really don't know this. When I get my property taxes, there's a line item for sewer, et cetera. And, you know, it comes to like $1,800 a year. And I'm wondering, is that directly tied to that 80 million, or is that for other services? So that's my list, and thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Judy.
Hi, John Thomas. I was going to apologize for my head indoors. My mother would not allow that, but Alex brought up what you do, what the dermatologist does to you if you don't get the lifeguard sun protection from the sun. So here we go. First, I want to commend Assistant City Manager Gavin Curran and his staff for once again producing a fun-filled, fact-filled page turner of a budget. I didn't want to spoil the ending for those who haven't finished reading it, but one of the best parts is that the current proposed budget includes performance measures for many of the departments, which will help the public understand what the city's 345 employees are doing with the taxpayer money. And this information should also help our new city manager better manage the city's many departments. So good thing. Secondly, I want to talk about revenue enhancements because we know there are a lot of expensive things that the city would like to be doing. And I want to give you something to think about when you're setting your goal there. The city of Beverly Hills has a population of 32,000 compared to about 22,000 for Laguna. So they got about 10,000 more residents. Yet the business license fee estimated in the Beverly Hills budget exceeds 50 million per year, compared to just over $1 million in Laguna based on a fee schedule that hasn't changed in many years. For those of us who read stuff like that, the first page of the Beverly Hills budget states, quoting, revenues generated from the business sector represent the majority of total general fund revenues. This allows the city to provide residents with the finest of residential living environments, clearly the city council's first objective. On the other hand, Laguna's budget states Property tax, which is 90% residential, accounts for 57% of the total revenue in the general fund. That means that in Laguna, the residents are subsidizing the businesses and the visitors, while in Beverly Hills, the visitors and businesses are subsidizing the residents. This should be the year that imbalance gets corrected. That's was basically, Gavin had an item, request not in the budget. This is kind of an afterthought. But from time to time we see, and you have an example today, that in closed session, the city discusses unforeseen opportunities like St. Catherine. And I'm just wondering whether we ought to begin to build in provisions for funding things like that in the future.
Thanks,
That's
John.
Good afternoon. Bill Nickham, 37-year resident, vice chair of EDPC, and former assistant fire chief with LA County Fire. I support and would like to comment on the community risk assessment and standards of coverage study recently revealed. Last year, our fire department obtained the comprehensive community risk assessment and standards of coverage study, which recommended significant improvements in staffing, equipment, communications, station facilities, and other critical resources to ensure the safety of our community. As sobering as the report was, it was not surprising. With the EPA predicting a systematic elevated wildfire threat due to climate change, it's prudent that we as a city act on these recommendations in a comprehensive and deliberate manner to protect our residents, our homes, our tax base, and our environment. EDPC was briefed on these findings in October of 2023 and unanimously approved a resolution to council recommending that they receive this presentation and consider directing staff to develop an implementation plan, including timelines and funding opportunities. We commend council for the funding the significant wildland fire safety measures in recent years, and certainly acknowledge the $500,000 included in the fire department's budget to implement the recommendations of the study. This in itself can fund 3 additional new firefighter paramedics in fiscal year 24-25. The first firefighter positions added to our department's workforce in decades. This is moving in the right direction, and I would encourage us to continue our drive towards making the city safer, putting one foot in front of the other till we work through some of our objectives. I'll close by restating something that I've shared before, and that the city of Laguna Beach stands right up against the city of Paradise and Lahaina. The only difference being one single source of ignition. This is something that we need to fully acknowledge what our real threat is in our city, and we need to be prepared for. Thank you for your support.
Thanks, Bill.
Good afternoon, Mayor Kemp, council members. Hope you're all doing well. I'm Sonny Myers, a member of the Emergency Disaster Preparedness Committee, and I'm also the director of our CERT program, the Community Emergency Response Team. I'm a longtime resident of Laguna Beach, going on 53 years, so I've been here a minute. I have 2 comments today I'd like to share with you. First of all, I support wholeheartedly the critical risk assessment and the standards of coverage that the fire department's going to be using, which I hope they're going to be using, which has been submitted to you and recommended improvements in the fire department staffing, equipment, communications, stations, facilities, and so on. And the other critical resources needed to keep our city prepared at a level that is necessary to adequately protect our city. The comprehensive community risk assessment standards of cover study was reviewed thoroughly by our EDPC committee. And as is stated in our resolution to the city council, the recommendations of the SOCCRA should be implemented by the city as soon as possible. My second comment is something that's kind of been on my radar for the last 3 years, is we've been trying to get radios for our building inspectors and our city building official, Dennis Bogle. 800 megahertz radios. I understand that money was put in the budget, but the purchase was never made. Our building inspectors are out in the field 5 days a week and are critical first responders in the event of an emergency, and they can use a radio when the cell towers go down and normal communications are broken. I'd like to see that funding go forward and have the city council direct our Director of Community Development, city manager to allocate the purchase of those radios that we've been trying to get for the last 3 years. Anyway, I'm happy to be a resident and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Sonny.
Matt Lawson, EDPC as well. Implementing these standards of cover recommendations for the fire department is needed not only to improve public safety, but also it's a prudent investment to protect the value of our homes and the city's tax base. The wildfires that threatened us in 2012 and 2015, in 2018, and twice in 2022, and I'm sure Sue's going to remember those vividly, all occurred when there were no other major incidents competing for outside resources. But with a climate that's increasing the risk of extreme weather everywhere, we're literally a spark and a gust away from our enviable property tax base being turned into millions of tons of toxic ash, as Chief Nickum referenced, as happened in Paradise and Lahaina within a few hours. Now, even if we dodge that bullet, we can't escape the increasing reluctance of insurers to cover homes in at-risk communities in California, especially those that lack adequate firefighting resources under National Fire Protection Association standards that require 16 firefighters at minimum to fight even a simple structure fire. As you all know, we have only 12 per shift, which is what we've had for decades. And we need to correct that at some point. According to the respected First Street Foundation, homes that are dropped by insurers immediately lose about 12% of their property value. And the state's underfunded FAIR Plan caps its coverage at $3 million, which wouldn't replace most of our homes today, given the incredible inflation that we've seen in building costs. And that fund only has about $200 million cash on hand. Now, they can probably get some more, but the question is how much. I also want to point out that both our fire and police agencies have demonstrated in recent years their ability to rapidly deploy and effectively operationalize and responsibly spend the resources given to improve their capabilities. We saw that the AMBO program. We've seen that all over our police department. And I think it can be said that the fire department could utilize those resources very responsibly and very effectively. They've demonstrated that in the past 18 months with the AMBO program. Lastly, Mary and I support restoring the 1931 Seagrave fire engine. It's an important morale factor for our firefighters, and we'll donate $1,000 to the city or to a 501c3 to help kickstart that effort. So thank you all. And thank you for bringing Dave Kiff on board. That's a real grand slam home run. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is David Horn. I am the Chair of the Greater Laguna Coast Fire Safe Council, member of the Emergency Disaster Preparedness Committee, and a Water Commissioner, all kind of rolled into one. I'd like to echo the comments from my colleagues on the committee and encourage you to do everything you can to put some money more into the firefighting mitigation funds. It's important, not just as Matt said, for our safety, but for the future well-being of the city as a whole and the insurability. I've been talking about insurance to this city council for probably 30 years, ever since the fire. And it's always been the same, that we need to continue our efforts to maintain insurability. As we've seen, it's dropped. And the way to get it back or to maintain it is to convince the underwriters that we are making serious steps in the areas that they care about. And what they care about is coverage. What they care about is landscape. What they care about is the overhead. Satellites that make a determination of insurability. That's what they care about. We need to maintain that for certain. And if we do that, we'll be lucky if we maintain some semblance of the insurance that we have now. People talking about discounts and all that is just ridiculous. What we need is just to have coverage and not worry about saying, oh, gee, I get 10% off. Well, 10% off if you have nothing, no insurance means nothing. So urging you to do what you can to maintain the resources available for the fire department, who is doing a great job with their limited resources. If we could do more, we would have a better chance of maintaining insurance, and that's a citywide thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, councils. My name is Andrew Hill, and I'm coming to you today with a passion proposal for you. I absolutely agree with the folks that spoke before me. I am a lifelong resident of Laguna Beach, was born and raised here, and have spent the last 35 years on the local fire department. So I cannot disagree with anything they said. But what I'm here today to ask you for is support in the restoration of the 1931 Seagrave. It's an important piece of the Laguna Beach history. It's a part of our history as a city, probably the oldest piece of equipment we own as a city. And it has really fallen into a state of disrepair. And so what I'm asking for is your consideration in providing for half the funding to get that restored. And the firefighters will work with the community to raise the other half, as Mr. Lawson already pledged. I think it will be a great opportunity for the citizens to get involved and take some pride in the community. And over the next 2 years, that fire engine would be restored and hopefully returned to us for our 2027 100-year celebration, which would be a great addition to it. So rest assured, I will see it through. I want to see the project completed, and I'm here to pledge not only my time, but also those of the firefighters to make sure we can get it done. And if you have any questions, feel free. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hello, council members, and welcome to the dais, Mr. Kiff. Laura Parisi, I am the city treasurer, and I know at a past meeting, I had heard at least 2 of the council members talk about wanting to do a review of expenses. And so I would like to suggest that the council set aside $25,000 for something called agreed upon procedures performed by our auditors to look at purchases. I'd be happy to coordinate it with the audit firm. It could be budgeted in the city treasurer department. It's actually part of the statutory responsibilities of a city treasurer. But that would be one way to complete that project. Agreed upon procedures are a process where you prepare a list of the testing that's going to be performed. The auditors perform the test and then report back to the council. My second piece that I wanted to bring up is I was hoping that we could be a little bit more aggressive on the interest income budget. To date, interest income is $1.4 million over budget. We're going to really do a great job of exceeding that budget. And so I would recommend, with all of the investments that were made during COVID that'll mature and then be able to be reinvested at current market rates, that the interest income budget, the investment budget, be increased to 3.5 million. Thank you.
Laura, what the first recommendation you have is what problem are you trying to solve there?
What I was doing, that would be a review performed by a third party. The problem is to look to see that our disbursements are properly approved, the disbursements agree with contracts. It would be a detailed audit of disbursements that are being made by the city. It would be a look back at perhaps the history.
Over a period of a year or?
Well, you know, for $25,000, you would have to limit the amount of time, because you would usually have to set a number of disbursements. You know, you might have them do 20 for 3 months, 3 different months through the year, and then trace those back to all of the trace them back to all of the control points that we would have as a city.
Okay. And other cities have done this and you've seen the results. You have any of those examples?
I do not have them with
Okay.
me. You know, you can do agreed upon procedures with really any process that you want performed. But the key thing is it would be a third party
Yeah.
taking a look at our work and giving us pointers on either we're following or, you know, here are places where we could improve.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Laura.
Hi, Council. Good afternoon. Paula Hornbuckle Arnold, Chairman of the Board, Laguna Beach Chamber of Commerce. Nice to see you all this afternoon. I'm going to speak on three things, one in which I did not anticipate speaking on, and that's the business license fees. While I agree with Mr. Thomas that there is room to adjust those fees, Beverly Hills is not Laguna Beach. We don't have Louis Vuitton and Gucci and Prada. So there's a market there that they can expect to increase their revenue where our retail environment is a little more homegrown. But I do agree that there is some room for adjustment in that. I wanted to say that. Secondarily, the fire truck, I would also contribute along with Matt Lawson if there's a 501c3 that is formed. I would love to see that fire truck built and beautiful again. Thirdly, I didn't. My vice chair, who's home with the flu today, presented a letter to council about revisiting the retail market evaluation that we did initially in 2019 and was presented in 2020. We feel like with the change in retail habits since COVID, we feel like we need to rethink how our consumers are spending their money locally. We'd also like to expand it from Boat Canyon to Diamond, and that's where our two initial proposals are right now, although there may be some appetite to expand it a little bit further. The two proposals we have, we just received the second one 3 or 4 days ago. So right now they're apples and oranges. They're not apples and apples. We need to get it to apples and apples so that we have an accurate budget, but I don't anticipate it being any more than $25,000 per agency if you agree to partner with us on that. That's what I have. Do you have any questions?
No, thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
Okay, any else? Oh, okay.
Hi, Council. So I put in front of you the memo that I provided for the records management position that I am highly recommending. And hand in hand with that, I didn't notice in the budget, and I could be wrong, the city needs to transition to another document portal for all the city's documents in order to comply with regulations regarding electronic records. So I encourage the council not only to fund this position for a records manager in the city clerk's office for the city as a whole, but hand in hand also to fund the transition from our current document portal that does not comply to one that does, and that would cost around $35,000 to $40,000 for that, but it's essential for the city. So those two things I humbly request.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Ann Christoph, and guess what? I'm going to talk about landscaping. There's a area near the South Laguna Fire Station where the Civic Association did a little project with the fire department to screen off the generator. It took us about 2 years to get the fence and the landscaping installed, and we were maintaining it in a way that conforms with the standards of the Landscape and Scenic Highways Plan, which is called naturalistic pruning, which means you don't shave off the flowers with a hedge trimmer. You go back in and you take out selective branches, and it always looks like nothing's happened to it, but you've managed the size of it. That's the recommendation of the Landscape and Scenic Highways Plan that we're supposed to be doing throughout our city. Instead, what we're having is shrubbery that's trimmed into balls and rectangles with hedge trimmers. Not only that, we have a lot of weeds. So the fact that a city staff person came and shaved off this little example of beautification we'd worked on with the hedge trimmer, set off my investigation into this matter. And I talked to Wayne Chintala about his staffing. You know, these guys who are out there, I was really tough on them. I'm sorry. I lost my cool because to see this one little achievement destroyed was not easy for me to accept. But they said, oh, we just don't have time to do it right. They don't give us enough time. And so I said, so I asked Wayne, how many guys do you have? He said 7 guys. And he sent me a list of all the things they're responsible for. It is a giant list of responsibilities, from everything from collecting trash to they're supposed to be artistically taking care of our landscapes, and they're supposed to be keeping up with the weeds. I really urge you to look into how our landscapes are being maintained. We should be gardened by the sea. We should, our area should look equally as good as how the city of the Irvine Company maintains its shopping centers. And it doesn't. The techniques are not good, the standards are not good, and they're not keeping up with it. Is it because they don't have enough people, or is it because the training isn't there, or is it because the standards aren't being applied, or all of the above? So I'd really like you to look into that and make our budget adjustments as needed to make a sizable improvement. Lastly, I support Diz and his efforts to keep the Seagrave engine back in the fleet. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll close the public hearing, bring it back to council. Okay, council, comments? Go ahead, Bob.
Just a couple other things to maybe get out on the table before we have the discussion. I know in the correspondence we all received, there was a request from Housing and Human Services, a budget request for 20,000 for public outreach on various housing programs. I don't know if there's anything in the budget yet for that. I think probably not. At the EDPC meeting last month, there was Brendan Manning raised an issue. Gavin, I know you were looking into whether or not an additional allocation was needed for EOC furniture, or whether that was all included, already set aside.
That the 75,000 that Brenda needed was included. I confirm that today.
Thank you. And then there's also discussion, and I know we've already had some discussion here today, but I understand they're looking at a microgrid possibility for the EOC, but currently there's no, emergency funding, emergency energy source for the EOC down there, so it doesn't function very well as an EOC. And there was discussion about a mobile generator. I'm wondering whether we should be thinking about funding that. It wouldn't just be for that location, but it would be available to that location. Kind of following up on one of George's comments on pedestrian, we had an email in from a community member on sidewalks on Thalia, which I don't know if there's anything on that in the long-range CIP or not, Tom. And then I see our community pool friends sitting here in the back. I mean, we as a council obviously took direction to move forward with a community pool. We haven't got a location, but are we, like we are for some of these other, are we programming that into the CIP? Current timeline, the school district has said we have to be out of the community has to be out of the city pool, the high school pool on September 1, 2025, and then they're going to close it, for reconstruction March 1, 2026. So we obviously need to be thinking about how we're going to program that into our CIP. And then I don't know if there's anybody here that can or wants to speak to it, but I think if it's not once, it might have been twice that we've, I think, asked for radios for the building department. They just keep seeming not to happen. So I would like to see that addressed in the final budget. I'll stop there for now. Those are the initial comments I had. Yeah, I would support the radios. I don't know why they haven't been implemented already. And I do want to hand out, if this is an appropriate time to talk about the Seagrave a little bit further, I have a handout for that. If Mayor, is that okay? Okay, thank you. I think there's enough there. I'll just say that I've been working with Battalion Chief Andrew Hill and looking at the Seagrave and its opportunity to restore it to what it was. It was the first piece of fire equipment we bought in 1931 for $7,500. And since 2013, it's been sitting idle. And it's a beautiful truck specifically made for Laguna Beach. And I think restoring it will be symbolic of our own history. Since 2027, we celebrate 100 years. And I wish I had handouts for everybody. I'll be happy to send these out to everyone. But it's going to cost a lot of money. We've gotten 3 bids and we've met with the vendors and gone to their shops. I don't know if they're going to be the selection, but they all seem to be competent. One of them's in Pennsylvania and does just fire trucks, but you got to send the fire truck to Pennsylvania. And, you don't know how you're going to track that. So the other 2 are local. So I think we have a good opportunity with 2 local vendors and maybe more that will bid on this once we send it out. And our goal is to have this accomplished by 2026, or really start in 2024, 2026. So 18 to 24 months. And we would track that, document it as the progress is made on the fire truck. And we're looking for $150,000 as half of the cost. It may be less, and then raise the rest of the money from the general public. And we're taking collections today. I have a hat down here. No, I appreciate those who've already volunteered to fund this, and I've heard from a number of other people who will. And so I think it'll be a great, effort to get the community involved and understand the history of this fire truck and be a symbol for the fire department itself and be used at various events. Santa's missed it terribly, I understand. And also the pancake breakfasts and other events we'll have locally. I imagine other people will want to see it even out of town because it's quite a treasure. So, any questions? I'm happy to answer them if I can, or Andrew can. I'm just helping him.
Mark?
Yeah, I do support the Seagrave. I also agree with Ann Christoph on the landscaping, and I think that will be an evolving conversation just to see how we can improve the landscaping throughout the city. I did have a question regarding the downtown action plan, if that was budgeted and looked at. Bob covered some of the other questions that I had, so I'll skip over those. I'm not sure how we would proceed with this next question that I have. Let me pull it up here. Is the city clerk's request, because I was in my notes and one of my questions I was hoping that now that the city manager is here and he's not quite dug in yet, but that we could actually proceed with an organizational assessment. And this would include for elected officials to determine, just making sure that we're being as efficient as possible and have all of our bases covered. So have you had time to review this request for the city clerk, or how do you see us making some of these decisions today and still allowing you the opportunity to proceed with an assessment?
Thank you, Councilmember Orgel. I have had time to dive in a little bit. I do take what the city clerk offered seriously. I also think that the city as a whole needs that kind of assessment, at least in terms of its records and records management. I think we need to figure out what we need to invest to get caught up, get everything scanned, get everything on a records retention schedule. And then, once that's in place, what do we need to keep it maintained? And I think both those things, I'll work with Gavin on that, between now and your budget adoption date. I can come forward with a more firm recommendation.
So would this budget request then cover that effort?
The budget request is specifically for a full-time position, and I very much respect the spirit in which the city clerk, the sincerity in which the city clerk offers that. I'd like to look at it and as a system and see if that full-time position could be provided another way or another level or at another time without minimizing what the city clerk has stressed is a key vulnerability of the city.
Great, thank
Or
you.
could it be a shared position is what?
Yeah,
you're saying?
exactly.
Right.
Well, he'll, come back with a recommendation at a later date for that. And at some point, I would like to, talk about the, our fees are for, community development. We're still a ways off, from really having it. I think we're 60% on community development, right? And, I would like to talk about that. But in the meantime, I would also, like to talk about just the appeal costs, because I know these appeals are costing us a fortune. And I think we should have cost recovery, start with cost recovery for appeals. And then eventually we can move into, once we get just the application process refined and the kinks worked out of it, I think we can revisit the fees and get as close to cost recovery as possible on all of those fees. But I think until we get our act together, I'll say, refined, I think that it's not appropriate to really adjust the fees on today's current time that it takes to process the application. So that will be, I guess, a further discussion down the road. Thank you.
Yeah, so I support all the requests that Bob made. I support the idea. So George, for your proposal, is that a matching proposal? So for every dollar that's raised by the community, it would be $1 from the
It
city
is.
up
I mean,
to.
Yeah, it really is. I don't know that it'll be 300,000. We're asking 150 today from the city to allocate. So if it's comes to be 125 and it's 250, then we're going to give that money back. We won't allocate it. What intention is to raise that money and then donate it to the city, who will then disperse the money to the selected vendor over time. And typically, these vendors, they want to be paid every month or every 2 weeks or, on a regular basis. So this disbursement will take place based on what they've done. For example, one of the vendors said it costs $12,000 to take the machine apart and put all the bolts in one pile and all the rest of the stuff in another pile. We're taking this down to the chassis to make sure that the chassis has a system integrity and then clean it and dip it into a rust proofing solution and take it out. So there'll be nothing left except parts. And that's just an example of what those processes cost. And so we're asking for a 1-to-1 ratio.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd be supportive of the match on that as well. And then I am supportive of the chamber's proposal. I think that is, especially with this comprehensive zoning code update that's going to happen, and just the fact that the world has changed so much since the last time this study was done. I think I'm supportive of that. Just stepping back, I really appreciate the work that Gavin's done on this budget. It's very exciting to have the performance metrics, because it's really, the budget's a policy document. These performance metrics allow the council and the community to really view it in that lens and see what are we getting out of this budget. So I'm very supportive of that and appreciate all the work that staff did to get there. I think, so I've been on the council now for 1.5 years, and our role really is to plan for the future. That's the conclusion I've come to after 1.5 years. And it's really not about the next. Oftentimes, we probably will spend more time on this appeal later tonight than we will on the budget, which is crazy for an appeal for a single family home compared to a $125 million budget. When we think about like how cheap it would have been if we could have undergrounded Laguna Canyon Road 20 or 30 years ago, it would be a lot cheaper, but we have a lot of deferred maintenance and deferred long-term projects. So so what I'd like to see is moving towards, and I'd be interested in the city manager's input, but moving towards a 5-year strategic financial plan that can incorporate all these big projects that we want to do, because that's going to help us understand which ones do we have the money to pay for and which ones should be put aside, because we can only really do so many things. So spinning and doing things that we don't have the money, planning for things that we don't have the money to actually pay for is not something that I'm supportive of. So I going forward, I'd like to see sort of a 5-year strategic financial plan as part of this budgeting process. The plans that I'm very interested in are one, the facilities master plan, which I see as part of our climate action plan, because all of our facilities provide an opportunity to put solar and batteries, which can not only reduce our carbon emissions and create resiliency, but also save taxpayer dollars in the long term. So, and there is sort of an urgency with all this, because the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot like the tax credits for solar, 30% tax credit, which we can pull down through direct pay, that's going to be gone in after 2032. So when we look at the cost benefit analysis of waiting until after 2032 to do it, that's not fiscally responsible. So I'd like to look at the Inflation Reduction Act and as we look at our CIP, be strategic about identifying projects like solar that should be done to take advantage of these tax credits, because doing it after that tax credit goes away just doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm very interested in our wastewater master plan, and I think over the next 5 years we have an opportunity to have hopefully we can get to the point of effectively zero discharge into the ocean. That'll be part of these SACWA discussions, but also local water reliability, which is something that the water district will be working on. But I'd like to see closer collaboration between our two entities. And then finally, the standards of coverage, which is something that's long overdue. And I'm supportive of adding the 6 firefighter paramedics so we can have 2 added to each shift, which was going to be a game changer in terms of our, because EMS is really that's the most important job, or at least on a college basis, that's the main role of the fire department. And it will be a game changer in allowing one paramedic who's let's say at Mission Hospital, that would allow that ambulance to get back in action in the city, which I think is really important. So I'm supportive of that. And then Councilmember Orgill made great comments about cost recovery. It's sort of insane that we're a city in Laguna Beach, we subsidize private development. Very few cities in Orange County or the state of California can say that. I agree with Mark that it's not a good idea to get to full cost recovery right now in community development, because our goal is to reduce the time, as we bring on a permanent director, we don't want to have a baseline that's too high, but ultimately we need to get to full cost recovery. And so in the meantime, I'm supportive of having the city manager and the city attorney bringing back a proposal that could get us to full cost recovery on these appeals, because I think that's where we need to be heading for the entire department, but that's going to be the easiest thing to implement in the short term. As we talk about opportunities for revenue enhancements, it's important that we look at ourselves first. And so I'm supportive of opportunities for cost savings and efficiency. And ultimately, it's the city manager who will be working on that for the entire department. I know Sue and I've both spoken to our new city manager about this and opportunities like Procure America. We have our new procurement officer, which I know the application for that went out. I don't know what the status of when that person will be hired, but that's going to happen. So there's opportunities there. I agree with Mark's. So to Anne Marie's request, I do think we need to look at how we're doing our records. The city clerk and I went and visited the Newport Beach city clerk, and they have a lot more staff in that office than Anne Marie does in hers. I'm supportive of what Councilmember Orgill suggested of kind of having the city manager bring back options of how we get there, because I think records are not something that we have to look at for the whole organization. So I'm open to adding this full-time position, but I'd like the city manager to bring back options for how to do that. And I like Mark's idea of the organizational assessment, both for sort of the city clerk and the city treasurer. It frustrates me the way that we do salaries for elected officials, because we're not really basing it on best practices or a clear methodology. So I'd like for the city manager as part of that to bring back look, to bring back, and maybe it's an outside assessment, I don't know, but looking at best practices for both the city clerk and the city treasurer, and how, and what are the duties that other jurisdictions have, and what are the staffing components for that, as well as salary. So I'd be supportive of that. And then finally, so Sue and the mayor and I have been working with Supervisor Foley on hopefully securing $500,000 for our microgrid at Act 5. So I'm hoping that we can put, because I think it's going to be around $1.2 million total. So if we can put, around $500,000 in the budget, then we can show that to the supervisor that we need her final funds to get this project going. So that's my final request. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bob?
One thing I mentioned, we're spending a lot of money up here that we may not quite have yet, but I guess we'll have staff figure that out when they come back in June. But I did ask Gavin yesterday and to take a look and see, when we look on page 21, some of these funds have no expenditures in them, which is like park in lieu and drainage in particular, to see whether we can utilize some of those monies in the budget, to give us really more flexibility in the funds we have available in the capital improvement and general fund. So I'd like to see us do that. Housing in lieu, I think we know what we're doing with that based on an item we have on the agenda later tonight, including, possible augmentation of that fund based on a loan repayment. So just to go down the list that others have done, I'm supportive of the Seagrave restoration up to the 150. I agree with Alex, we ought to match with the chamber on the retail market analysis. I think that will be beneficial. The Housing and Human Services, 20,000, I would ask if others on council are supportive, we should fund that again. I think they made very effective use of their budget this year. Mobile generator, at least come back with some discussion for council on at the budget adoption time as to what the plan is there. If we're not going to do it, then what's the plan to get the EOC? I mean, microgrid ultimately is probably the answer, but we can't wait 2 years for a microgrid. And then I think there was agreement on the radios, it sounded like, and the community pool. I think, looking ahead, the other thing, kind of Alex's points, I think are right on in terms of, looking for future planning. We have done 5-year plans in the past. I think we're currently don't have an updated one, so I think we should do that. But, we've had different reserves set aside in here that we're coming to the end of, like the pension reserve. We've been spending that down because we knew we were going to have increased pension costs. Well, once you're out of that reserve, then you're having to increase your funding. So I'd like to look at that, have as part of the longer range look as well. And then I'm sorry, there was that one. And then, the cybersecurity position. We didn't ask the city manager on that, whether you've have an opinion yet after a week being here. It seems like everywhere you read, people are getting more cybersecurity positions filled just because of the risk.
I don't have an opinion yet, but I expect to have one soon.
Okay.
Yeah. Big issue.
So I guess we'll hear back on that. And then I support, if we can get, obviously if we can leverage that and get $500,000 or more from the supervisor, we should definitely put money aside for microgrid.
Is that it, Bob?
I think that's it.
Yeah, on that supervisor, request, we should know pretty soon. Alex and I
She
went,
said she's going to decide by June.
yeah, we gave a presentation to her, I don't know, a couple months ago, kind of went over everything with her in her office. Yeah, my list, I agree with Dave, kind of suss out whether or not we need a cybersecurity person. I think we probably would benefit by that, but I'll let you guys decide that. The generator, I do agree with Bob. The fire truck, I'm fine with that. Maybe do the no GoFundMe, and I'd be happy to contribute to that as well. On the CD, and fees for appeals, I agree with both Alex and Mark on that. I think we need to, when we can get our community development department more in line with what it needs to be, then we can look at the fees. I think the best way to work on community development is to do lean, because that's the best way you get underneath why are we doing what we're doing. And, it helps with efficiency, eliminates waste. It's actually an excellent tool. We were making a lot of progress on that right before the pandemic. So I think, Dave, there's a presentation on it. I can show you if you have any questions. I can talk to you about that. I want to do a program. So next month, not to get ahead of ourselves, but next month, Mark and I are bringing a commercial maintenance ordinance to, before council. I think it's the last meeting in June. And the goal that I'm trying, my goal in this program, and I haven't thought of a name yet, because I'm trying to think of something clever. So I've asked all my creatives around town, so they're giving me ideas. But the idea would be to get the town just looking better, not only just the buildings, but the landscaping. Like Ann mentioned, the landscaping, I totally agree with that. And maybe we have a program where if a building owner fixes up their building, maybe if there's, something in city property that we could do some landscape upgrades to help with the beautification, that would be good. Because if you really walk around, start looking at our town, which I've been doing a lot of lately, it does need a lot of landscaping work, and it needs a lot of independent, building owner renovations and repair. Also signage, I'm starting to see a lot of signage. We have a signage ordinance, but I'm seeing a lot of diversion from the signing ordinance, which is making our town look a little bit more like, one thing I really don't like when I go through Corona Del Mar is, to me, is sign pollution everywhere. And I'd like to get back to our sign ordinance and do something that's looks a little bit more like what Laguna should look like. And then I've talked to Dave a little bit about this too. I think we just need to, and we have enough code enforcement people, but I think we need to, step up our code enforcement action, because you see sandwich boards, people hanging clothes on their doorways and stuff like that. That's not the look we'd like to have for Laguna. And I agree with the chamber proposal. Mark and I met we had one meeting with Cosmot and related to the promenade, but there's a lot of good information that a retail specialist could help us with. And a lot of the retailers, are just having a difficult time just because retail in general, the retail environment is not very robust, as we all know. I was going to ask Gavin, is there any room to raise the parking fees at Aliso? So I think we raised them. Do we raise them $1 to $2.50, from $1 to $2.50 or something?
Well, they follow the CDP, so they will go with whatever the
Okay.
city
Okay.
rates are.
So that's
They'll
a
be increased,
coastal.
But it'll go, yeah, it's a
Okay.
coastal issue, yes.
Okay. I agree about the firefighters. People have already mentioned that. And I'm also supportive of best practices for the city treasurer and city manager. I mean, not city manager. Okay, Dave, we'll start working on you next. The city clerk and the city treasurer. And I think that's it for me. Okay,
Yeah.
anybody else?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I do support a lot of the things that my colleagues have already mentioned, especially the cost recovery part for community development. I think that should be done incrementally over time, over the next 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is appropriate. I also think the landscape should be improved in Laguna Beach. I've walked a lot of them, and I think if we need to raise the funding for that, I think we should. I think we should move to more natural landscapes, those that the pollinators and all of the things that were here before we moved in to town occupied. We have only about 10% of the natural landscape left in what we live in is California coastal shade scrub, or ESHA, and only 10% of us left. Let's restore it, because it can be very beautiful as well. It's a little harder to maintain, but it is also fire resistant, because these things grew here for 3 million years, like lemonade berry, and will help us with fire safety. I agree with the records. Let me, city manager, take a look at that, and also cybersecurity. I'm not opposed to adding. Let me just say that I'm opposed to adding staff We've shown that we've added staff in community development and it hasn't done much good. We're going to be spending $1 million in BBK, which I'm fine with, but I still don't know what all the root causes of that were. We'll get a presentation on that this afternoon. The community pool funding, Bob mentioned, I'd like to see where that is. It was a 5-0 vote to move forward with the community pool and also assess where it should go. We're going to need to plan for that. Appreciate the support for the Seagrave, and I'll be donating as well and helping with the marketing plan as I can. Let me think, anything else? Solar credits, I applaud us getting $500,000. That would be great from Foley's office. And thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, any further comments for staff on the budget? Okay, Gavin, did you get all that? Got everything?
Yes, we got a lot of to-dos. We'll be ready on
Okay.
June 24th.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
I'll just make one quick
Yeah, go
comment.
ahead.
Yeah.
And maybe I can talk to Paula, that we can get together and talk prior. I don't know how you're going to take the chamber's request for the retail market evaluation, but there's some, there might be an opportunity to combine that with some other conversations that we'll be having shortly with Visit Laguna. And as we kind of merge into the revisiting the business improvement district. And anyway, I'll save it for another conversation, but there's some pieces of the puzzle that I think that we can put together to make everything really come to fruition. The biggest question out of an evaluation like that is what do you want to be? We know that we have the hotels, all of their ADRs are going to rise significantly. They're all going through serious remodels. We're doing the downtown action plan. We're doing, some other things. And I just think that it's going to change the dynamics. And I think all of those pieces of the puzzle need to be put, gathered and conveyed to whoever it is that we engage with.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that concludes the budget workshop. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. We are going into closed session now, and I'm just going to review our closed session agenda very quickly. We have 4 items. Conference with legal counsel, existing litigation. There's 2 cases there. Conference with real property negotiators. The negotiator is Dave Kiff, and that's property at 31532 and 31526 Coast Highway. Conference with labor negotiators.
Mayor, I hate to interrupt you, but it's not quite 3:30 yet. And so the closed session has to start at 3:30.
We have to sit here for 5 minutes. Okay.
Just sit here. Just move the clock. Nobody will know. So we have to stay here.